Her name is Sloane Harris, retired elite military, trained in tactical warfare, and deadly calm under pressure. He thought she was just another victim. The slap echoed across the neighborhood. He didn't know she was more dangerous than anyone he's ever pulled over. She's about to expose an entire system that's been protecting men like him for years. As the threats grow darker and the attacks get personal, Sloane's background becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. What happens when the most powerful woman in the room decides it's time to bring it all down? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning air was crisp as Sloane Harris stepped onto her front porch, the first hints of dawn barely visible over the pristine rooftops of Arlington. She bent down to double-knot her running shoes, a habit drilled into her through decades of military precision. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, each loop perfect and secure. The smartwatch on her wrist displayed 6:15 a.m. in soft blue light. Sloane tapped the screen, scrolling to her favorite podcast about combat psychology. Dr. Sarah Chen's familiar voice filled her wireless earbuds, discussing the lasting effects of heightened situational awareness in veterans. The hypervigilance never fully disappears, Dr. Chen was saying. The key is learning to channel it productively. Sloane allowed herself a small smile. 7 years into civilian life, and those words still rang true. Her eyes automatically scanned the quiet street. Left, right, then left again. Old habits died hard, especially ones that had kept her alive across 3 continents. The modern 2-story house behind her stood silent and secure, its clean lines and large windows a deliberate choice. Good sight lines, multiple exit points, reinforced doors. To her neighbors, it probably looked like any other upscale home. But Sloane had modified it with the same attention to detail that had earned her command of Delta Force's most elite units. She started her warm-up stretches, muscles responding with familiar readiness. At 48, Sloane kept herself in better shape than operators half her age. The morning routine wasn't just about fitness, it was about maintaining the discipline that had defined her life. The first mile was always the most peaceful. Her steady footfalls carried her past manicured lawns, where sprinklers were already humming to life. The neighborhood was starting to stir. Mrs. Chen from number 234 was walking her Pomeranian, offering a polite nod as Sloane passed. They had exchanged fewer than 50 words in 7 years, which suited Sloane just fine. The podcast shifted to discussing reintegration challenges. Sloane's mind drifted to her own transition. The private consulting work helped. Advising federal agencies on tactical operations let her use her expertise without being in the field. But lately, something felt off in her own neighborhood. More patrol cars, more random stops, more reports of suspicious persons that somehow always seemed to describe people of color. The changes had been subtle at first, but Sloane's training made her sensitive to shifting patterns. What others saw as increased security, she recognized as the early stages of surveillance and control. A young black woman was pulling out of her driveway, her expression tightening as a patrol car crawled past. Their eyes met briefly, and Sloane recognized the look, the constant calculation of how to appear non-threatening, how to avoid attention, how to navigate spaces where your mere presence was somehow suspicious. Sloane maintained her pace, her breathing controlled and steady. The morning sun was higher now, casting long shadows across perfectly trimmed hedges and pristine sidewalks. A group of early morning dog walkers clustered near the corner, their easy laughter carrying across the quiet street. Her watch showed she'd covered nearly 2 miles. Dr. Chen's voice continued in her ears, discussing the importance of maintaining routine while staying alert to changing circumstances. Sloane had built her civilian life around that balance, being present in her community while keeping her capabilities carefully concealed. The corner of Hawthorne Street approached, marking the halfway point of her regular route. A delivery truck was making early morning rounds, its driver offering a friendly wave. Sloane acknowledged it with a slight nod, her peripheral vision catching movement in the distance. The sound came first, the low rumble of a powerful engine moving slower than normal traffic. Then the reflection in a nearby window, white and black paint, the distinctive light bar on top. Sloane didn't break stride or turn her head, but her senses shifted into familiar clarity, cataloging details automatically. Crown Victoria. Single occupant. Speed, approximately 7 miles per hour. The radio volume, which had been clearly audible through the open windows, suddenly decreased. The patrol car drew closer, matching her pace from behind. Sloane continued running, her expression neutral despite the familiar tension building in her shoulders. 7 years in this neighborhood. Hundreds of morning runs. But today, something was different. The vehicle accelerated slightly, swinging out to her left. The front bumper drew even with her position, then the passenger door, then the rear quarter panel. The car pulled forward and angled toward the curb, cutting off her path as she approached the corner of Hawthorne and 12th. The patrol car's door opened with deliberate slowness. Officer Kyle Brenner emerged, adjusting his belt with the practiced swagger of someone who enjoyed making others wait. His clean-pressed uniform and polished badge couldn't hide the contempt in his eyes as he looked down at Sloane. "ID!" he barked, not bothering with introductions or explanations. Sloane stood perfectly still, her breathing still measured despite the interrupted run. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Brenner's lips curled into what might have been a smile, but held no warmth. "Had some break-ins reported in the area. You fit the profile we're looking for." His eyes wandered over her athletic frame with inappropriate interest. "I live 3 blocks from here," Sloane said evenly. "I run this route every morning." "ID," Brenner repeated, taking a step closer. "Unless you've got something to hide?" Sloane noticed his hand resting casually on his weapon, a deliberate intimidation tactic she'd seen countless times before. She kept her voice neutral, though her mind was cataloging every detail of his stance, his movements, the way his weight shifted forward aggressively. "My ID is in my phone case," she said clearly. "I'm going to reach for it slowly. Make it quick." Brenner's hand tightened on his weapon. Sloane maintained eye contact as she carefully retrieved her phone. The case held her driver's license, which she extracted with 2 fingers. Brenner snatched it from her hand, studying it with exaggerated attention. "Sloane Harris," he read aloud, drawing out each syllable. "Well, Ms. Harris, seeing as you're so cooperative, we might as well be thorough. Hands against the car." "Is that really necessary?" Sloane asked, knowing the answer before he spoke. "You questioning my authority?" Brenner's voice hardened. "Hands against the car." Sloane complied, placing her palms flat against the warm metal of the patrol car. Years of training screamed through her muscles. Pressure points, counter moves, dozen of ways to neutralize the threat behind her. She pushed those instincts down, remaining still as Brenner approached. His pat-down was unnecessarily rough, hands lingering longer than protocol dictated. Sloane kept her breathing steady, focusing on a small scratch in the car's paint rather than the violation occurring. She'd faced worse in interrogation resistance training, but this was different. This wasn't combat. This was her neighborhood, her morning run, her country. Then came the slap. Sharp, deliberate, humiliating. Brenner's hand struck her bottom with enough force to echo in the quiet morning air. "All clear, sweetheart," he drawled, his voice thick with satisfaction. "You can go about your business now." Sloane's hands trembled slightly against the car, not from fear, but from the sheer effort of maintaining control. Every fiber of her being wanted to respond, to demonstrate exactly how clear things weren't. But she recognized the trap. One wrong move, one justified reaction, and she'd be another statistic, another aggressive suspect who resisted a routine stop. Brenner stepped back, tossing her ID onto the ground between them. "Have a nice run," he said, clearly disappointed by her lack of reaction. "Be careful out there. Never know what kind of trouble you might run into." Sloane waited until he had returned to his cruiser before bending to retrieve her license. Her movements were precise, controlled, masking the storm building inside her. She watched in her peripheral vision as Brenner spoke into his radio, probably logging the stop with whatever fictional justification he'd invented. Only when the patrol car pulled away did Sloane allow herself to acknowledge the full weight of what had just occurred. Her hands were steady now as she pulled out her phone, muscle memory finding the number she needed. 2 rings, then a familiar voice answered. "Colonel Jackson." "Ray," Sloane said, her voice carrying the same calm she'd used during the most critical operations. "I've got a situation. I need to handle it quietly. For now." She watched Brenner's patrol car disappear around the corner, its taillights glowing like red eyes in the morning shadows. The neighborhood around her continued its peaceful morning routine. Sprinklers running, birds calling, neighbors beginning their days. But everything had changed. The illusion of safety in her own community had been shattered, replaced by a familiar clarity of purpose. The sun climbed higher over the Arlington rooftops, casting long shadows across the spot where she stood. 7 years of civilian life had taught Sloane patience, but 20 years of Delta Force had taught her something else: how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Sloane's kitchen was bathed in afternoon sunlight, the granite island cool beneath her forearms as she sat perfectly still, staring at her laptop screen. Her service weapon, a custom Sig Sauer P226, rested beside the computer, its presence both familiar and necessary after this morning's encounter. The weight of it grounded her, a reminder of who she was beneath the civilian clothes. The smartwatch footage played silently on her screen. She'd forgotten she'd even activated the recording feature, a habit from her Delta Force days: always document everything. Now she watched herself from an observer's perspective, seeing how Brenner's body language had telegraphed his intentions from the moment he stepped out of the car. "Textbook predator behavior," she muttered, noting how he'd positioned himself to block her path, his dominant hand always near his weapon. The camera angle from her wrist captured everything: his wandering eyes, the unnecessary touching, the deliberate humiliation. When the slap came, Sloane's jaw tightened. The sound was clearly audible in the recording. She created 3 backup copies of the video, encrypting each one before storing them on separate secure drives. One would go to Ray, one to her lawyer, and one would stay with her. The 4th copy remained on her watch. Let them try to confiscate it if they came looking. Opening a new browser window, Sloane typed in Officer Kyle Brenner's name and badge number. Her federal clearance gave her access to databases most civilians couldn't touch. Within minutes, a pattern emerged that made her blood run cold. 8 complaints in 3 years, she read aloud, scrolling through the reports. All female suspects. All during routine stops. The language was sanitized, bureaucratic. Insufficient evidence to pursue. Victim declined to cooperate. Witness statement withdrawn. But between the lines, Sloane saw the truth. These women hadn't declined. They'd been silenced. One case caught her eye. A young black woman named Tamika Roberts stopped for a broken taillight. The complaint described an inappropriate search. But halfway through the investigation, Roberts suddenly moved out of state. Her forwarding address led to a vacant lot in Nevada. Sloane opened her encrypted email and attached the video file, sending it to Ray with a simple message. Morning encounter with Arlington PD. Officer Kyle Brenner. Need background. His response came less than 2 minutes later. He's protected. Cousin runs internal affairs. 2 uncles on city council. You sure you want to go down this road? The question hung in the air as Sloane stood, walking to her kitchen window. The same patrol car from this morning rolled past her house, moving slower than necessary. Message received. They were watching, waiting to see what she'd do. She returned to her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she dug deeper. Brenner's personnel file was heavily redacted, but the gaps told their own story. Transfers between 3 precincts in 5 years. Disciplinary hearings that vanished into thin air. Performance reviews that read like promotional materials despite the complaints. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Ray. Just heard back from a contact. Brenner's cousin in IA, James Brenner, has buried at least 15 serious complaints against officers in the last year. Family business. Sloane's training kicked in, compartmentalizing the anger into something useful. She needed more information, more evidence, more connections. Opening her contacts list, she scrolled to a name she hadn't called in years. Marcus Chen, former NSA analyst turned private investigator. The phone rang twice. Chen Investigations. Marcus, it's Sloane Harris. A pause, then a low whistle. Commander Harris, been a while. Still keeping the world safe for democracy? Something like that. Sloane's voice was steady, professional. I need a deep trace on an Arlington PD officer and the department's entire misconduct roster for the past 5 years. Full background, financial records, property holdings, known associates. Special attention to any connections with internal affairs. That's not a small request, Commander. Marcus's tone turned serious. Police departments don't like people poking around their dirty laundry. Neither do I, Marcus. Sloane glanced at her service weapon, still lying silent on the counter. But someone needs to start washing it. Give me 48 hours, Marcus said. I'll send everything through our secure channel. And Sloane? Watch your back. Small-town cops with something to hide. They're worse than any enemy we faced overseas. Understood. Sloane ended the call, turning back to her laptop. The video still played silently on the screen, Brenner's smug face frozen in mid-smirk as he violated her dignity. She let the image burn into her memory, fuel for what was coming. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across her kitchen floor as another patrol car crept past her house. They were trying to intimidate her, show her who owned these streets, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. 20 years in Delta Force had taught Sloane the value of patience, the importance of gathering intelligence before striking. She began a new document, typing out names, dates, connections. Every detail would matter. Every link would need to be verified. She had learned long ago that justice wasn't about revenge. It was about precision. Dawn broke over Arlington as Sloane eased her charcoal BMW into a secluded spot behind an aging oak tree. The Public Records Office loomed across the street, its brick facade still dark and uninviting at this early hour. She'd chosen this particular lot for its poor surveillance coverage, a blind spot she'd noted during her years of tactical consulting. Her iPad hummed to life, displaying the fruits of Marcus Chen's investigation. The screen's blue light illuminated her face as she settled in, a travel mug of black coffee cooling in the cup holder beside her. The profile on Officer Kyle Brenner was more extensive than she'd expected. 14 complaints, she murmured, scrolling through the detailed report. The pattern was clear and disturbing. 3 of the cases involved black women, all dismissed with the same bureaucratic language. Insufficient evidence to warrant further investigation. The first victim, Shanice Williams, had reported inappropriate touching during a traffic stop in 2019. The complaint vanished after 2 weeks. The second, Andrea Thompson, filed a formal grievance about sexual harassment during a routine search in 2020. Her case was closed when she suddenly withdrew her statement. The third, Keisha Morris, had documented unwanted advances and threatening behavior in 2021. Her file was marked uncooperative witness after she missed a single follow-up interview. Sloane's jaw tightened as she read the details. Each woman's story echoed her own experience: the unnecessary stops, the physical violations disguised as procedure, the implicit threats. But unlike her, these women hadn't had Delta Force training or high-level connections. They'd been vulnerable, isolated, and ultimately silenced. A new document opened on her screen: the Internal Affairs Organizational Chart. At the top sat Jack Milner, Brenner's cousin through marriage. His personnel file showed rapid promotions, each one coinciding with the dismissal of a major misconduct case. The connection was obvious to anyone looking closely enough. "Family takes care of family," Sloane muttered, taking a sip of coffee. But the corruption didn't stop there. Her fingers swiped through financial records, property deeds, and corporate filings. A pattern emerged, a web of connections leading to Civic Sentinel, a private security firm that had won numerous municipal contracts over the past 3 years. The company specialized in community safety programs, in what they euphemistically called transitioning neighborhoods. Sloane pulled up Civic Sentinel's corporate registration. The majority shareholder was listed as a holding company, but Marcus had traced it back to its source: Councilman Derek Vaughn, the self-styled progressive voice on Arlington's city council. More documents filled her screen. Civic Sentinel's patrol zones perfectly overlapped with recently gentrified areas. Their security officers, many of them former cops with questionable records, had been granted unusual access to police databases and dispatch systems. In the neighborhoods they monitored, complaint rates against regular police officers dropped to 0. Not because the abuse had stopped, Sloane realized, but because Civic Sentinel controlled who could report what. She opened another file, a series of emails between Vaughn and various city officials. The language was careful, coded, but the meaning was clear. Civic Sentinel wasn't just providing security. They were helping to manage demographic shifts in targeted neighborhoods. Property values in these areas had skyrocketed. Long-time residents, primarily people of color, had been pushed out through a combination of rising rents and constant harassment. And officers like Brenner served as the front line, making life uncomfortable for anyone who didn't fit the desired profile. A police cruiser rolled past her parking spot, and Sloane instinctively lowered her iPad. The car continued without slowing. Not Brenner, just regular patrol. Still, her pulse had quickened slightly. 20 years of combat experience had taught her to trust those instincts. She returned to the documents, focusing now on Councilman Vaughn's public statements. He portrayed himself as a champion of police reform, even while his private company profited from systemic abuse. His most recent speech praised Arlington's community-oriented policing initiatives, the same programs that had given Civic Sentinel unprecedented power. The pieces fit together like a tactical assessment. Brenner's harassment, his cousin's protection, Vaughn's security empire. It wasn't random. It was a system, carefully designed and maintained. The kind of system that could only function if people stayed afraid, stayed quiet, stayed in their place. Sloane's coffee had gone cold. She'd been reviewing files for over 2 hours, building a complete picture of the corruption she'd stumbled into. Her military training had taught her to gather intelligence before engaging, to understand the full scope of an operation before taking action. The morning sun now filled the parking lot, eliminating the shadows she'd used for cover. Soon, the Public Records Office would open, its employees arriving to maintain the very documents that exposed their master's crimes. Sloane took one final look at the organizational chart on her screen, at all the lines connecting power to profit, to pain. She closed her laptop slowly, whispering, "It's never just one man." The setting sun cast long shadows across Sloane's front lawn as she turned onto her street. Her tactical instincts, honed through years of Delta Force operations, immediately registered something wrong. The motion-activated floodlight that usually greeted her arrival remained dark. She parked in her driveway, engine idling, and observed. The mailbox door hung slightly ajar, its metal surface showing fresh scratch marks around the lock. Someone had forced it open, not bothering to hide their handiwork. A message, then, not a theft. Sloane stepped out of her car, maintaining situational awareness as she'd been trained. She approached the mailbox carefully, noting the precise pattern of the damage. Professional tools, clean edges. This wasn't random vandalism. Looking up at her porch, she spotted the disconnected wire on her floodlight. Cut, not torn. Inside her house, she conducted a methodical sweep, room by room, gun drawn. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but the air felt different. Someone had been here, or wanted her to think they had. The violation of her space sent a cold anger through her chest, but she kept it controlled, channeled. "Amateur intimidation tactics," she muttered, holstering her weapon after clearing the last room, but she knew better than to dismiss the threat. In her line of work, warnings usually escalated to action. Sloane retrieved a locked case from her garage, emergency surveillance equipment she'd kept from her consulting days. Within an hour, she had installed 3 hidden cameras with overlapping fields of view covering her front approach. 2 more went up monitoring the back of the house, each camera connected to a secure cloud server that Ray had helped her set up months ago, encrypted and backed up in multiple locations. Her phone buzzed, a text from her grocery delivery service saying they were out of her usual brand of coffee. She'd have to go to the store herself. Fine. She needed to move anyway. To think. The Whole Foods was 10 minutes away. She took her usual route, but with heightened awareness. 3 blocks in, she spotted it. A black Chevrolet Tahoe, 2 cars back. Clean, recent model. Government plates. At the next light, the Tahoe disappeared, replaced by an identical vehicle with civilian plates. Same model, different driver. Sloane took a deliberate wrong turn, confirming her tale. The SUV followed at a professional distance. She pulled into the grocery store lot, choosing a spot with clear sight lines. The Tahoe cruised past, now sporting a 3rd set of plates. Someone was trying to rattle her, showing their reach while maintaining deniability. Inside the store, Sloane moved efficiently through the aisles, keeping track of faces, positions, patterns. An older man with a cart full of produce appeared in 3 different sections. A woman in workout gear seemed very interested in whatever aisle Sloane occupied. Standard surveillance, meant to be noticed. At the checkout, she pulled out her phone to text Ray. Her fingers paused over the keyboard, considering her words carefully. No point in encryption. If they were watching this closely, they'd already compromised her basic communications. "They know I'm looking," she typed. Ray's response came quickly. "Then they'll escalate." The drive home felt longer than usual. At a red light, her car's entertainment system suddenly reset itself, the screen flickering before rebooting. Not a coincidence. Modern vehicles were rolling computers, vulnerable to the right kind of interference. Sloane parked in her garage, closing the door before exiting her car. The house was dark, exactly as she'd left it. Her new cameras showed no movement on her phone's secure feed. Still, she drew her pistol before entering, keeping it low but ready. She moved through the rooms like a shadow, checking angles, noting sight lines through windows. Every corner held potential threats now. Every dark space needed clearing. The training was automatic. Slice the pie, check the corners, maintain awareness. The house was clear, but Sloane knew sleep wouldn't come easily tonight. She stood in her living room, hand resting near the pistol on her hip. watching the street through a gap in the curtains. They wanted her to feel this way, exposed, uncertain, alone. But they'd made a mistake. They'd shown their hand too early, revealed their resources. Now she knew what she was dealing with. And if there was one thing Delta Force had taught her, it was how to turn intimidation tactics back on the intimidators. Sloane moved to another window, checking another angle. Her finger traced the grip of her weapon absently. The darkness outside seemed to press against the glass, but she stood firm, unafraid. They thought they were hunting her. They didn't realize she'd spent her entire career learning to be the hunter. The morning sun barely crept over the horizon when Sloane pulled out of her driveway. Her car's diagnostic system had run a full check last night. Every light, every system functioning perfectly. She'd made sure of it. 2 blocks from home, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Sloane's jaw tightened as she pulled over, positioning her car where her dashcam had the clearest view. The approaching officer was a woman, Officer Kelly, according to her nameplate. Her face was hard, expression frozen in practiced intimidation. "License and registration," Kelly demanded without preamble. No greeting, no explanation. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Sloane kept her voice neutral, hands visible on the steering wheel. "Taillight infraction." Kelly's words came out clipped, rehearsed. She didn't even glance at the supposedly broken light. Sloane reached slowly for her documents, maintaining steady eye contact in the side mirror. Kelly's hand rested deliberately on her weapon, a show of force that might frighten others, but to Sloane it revealed insecurity, poor training. When she handed over her military ID and registration, Kelly's eyes narrowed at the credentials. The officer studied them longer than necessary, thumb brushing over the federal clearance codes. A muscle in her jaw twitched, recognition, maybe even uncertainty. "Wait here," Kelly ordered, returning to her patrol car. Sloane watched in her mirrors as Kelly made a call, then another. 10 minutes passed. The morning commute flowed around them, other drivers slowing to stare. Finally, Kelly returned, thrust the documents back through the window. "You're free to go. Fix that light." Her tone carried an edge of warning that had nothing to do with vehicle maintenance. Sloane drove directly to her mechanic. As expected, all taillights worked perfectly. She had him document it, photograph everything. Evidence mattered now. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with an email from the Federal Consulting Division. Subject line, "Contract Status Update. Urgent." Her security clearance was under routine review. All current projects suspended. No timeline for reinstatement. She read it twice, noting the careful bureaucratic language masking the threat. They were cutting off her income, her professional credentials, standard pressure tactics. At home, her secure phone lit up with alerts. Someone had posted her address on multiple neighborhood watch forums. The listing appeared on Civic Sentinel's private network, tagged as "Community Alert, Watch This Residence." Comments flooded in, each more hostile than the last. Known troublemaker. Anti-police activist. Keep your children away. Someone should teach her respect. Sloane screenshotted everything, downloading copies to encrypted drives. Her fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, documenting times, usernames, IP addresses when visible. The posts were coordinated, timed to create maximum exposure during peak evening browsing hours. Her doorbell camera activated. A car drove past, slowly, deliberately. Then another. Random citizens now, doing exactly what the posts wanted. Watching, reporting, becoming unwitting tools in the harassment campaign. Sloane stood at her window, watching another vehicle crawl past. The driver didn't even try to hide his phone as he filmed her house. They were trying to make her feel trapped, exposed. But they'd forgotten something crucial. She'd spent years teaching soldiers how to operate behind enemy lines. This was familiar territory. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a name: Miriam James. The civil rights attorney's reputation was legendary in Virginia legal circles. She'd spent decades fighting police misconduct, winning impossible cases through sheer determination and razor-sharp legal strategy. Sloan had vetted her thoroughly last week. Miriam's record showed a particular talent for cases involving systemic abuse of power. More importantly, she had no connections to Arlington's political machine. No leverage points they could exploit. The phone rang 3 times before a firm voice answered. "James speaking." "Ms. James, this is Sloan Harris. I need your help with a situation involving Arlington PD." A pause, then, "The Delta Force, Commander? I've been following your case through my channels, wondering when you'd call." Sloan watched another car drive past, this one moving even slower than the others. A camera flash went off. She didn't flinch. "I'm ready to go public," Sloan said, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had finished calculating all possible outcomes. The women's shelter sat at the end of a quiet street in southeast D.C., its brick facade weathered but dignified. Sloan parked 3 blocks away, walking the rest on foot. Old habits die hard. Miriam James waited by the entrance, her silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, leather briefcase clutched firmly in one hand. "You weren't followed?" Miriam asked, her eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. "Not directly. But they'll figure it out soon enough." Sloan matched Miriam's low tone. "Ava's expecting us." "3rd floor. She's nervous. Took me 2 weeks just to convince her to meet." They signed in under aliases, following a shelter worker through narrow hallways. The walls were lined with children's artwork, bright splashes of color against peeling paint. Sloan noted every exit, every camera, every potential vulnerability. Some things you couldn't unlearn. Ava Marcus sat at a small table in what appeared to be a counseling room. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. Dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. When she looked up, Sloan saw a flash of recognition. Not of her face, but of her presence. The way trauma survivors often recognized each other. "Thank you for meeting us," Miriam said softly, taking the seat across from Ava. "We can stop any time you need to." Ava nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw what happened to you on the news, Ms. Harris." "What he did. It was the same with me, 2 years ago." "Tell us what you can," Sloan encouraged, remaining standing. She'd learned long ago that some women felt safer with another woman between them and the door. "I was walking home from my night shift at the hospital. Officer Brenner stopped me. Said there'd been reports of drug activity." Ava's fingers twisted together. He touched me during the search. When I tried to pull away, he slammed me against the car. Said I was resisting." Miriam's pen moved steadily across her legal pad. "Did you file a complaint?" "I tried. Went straight to the station." "But his cousin in internal affairs." Ava's voice cracked. "They charged me instead. Said I attacked him. CPS showed up the next day. Said my arrest made me an unfit mother. They took my babies, Johnny and Maya. They're with their father now. He won't let me see them." Sloan's jaw clenched. She'd seen this pattern before. The system weaponized against those who dared to speak up. A soft knock at the door made Ava flinch. Another woman entered, younger, Latina, with a determined set to her jaw despite obvious fear. "This is Lena Rowe," Miriam introduced. "She has a similar story." Lena pulled up a chair, her movements careful, measured. "Different precinct, same cop. He knows which women to target, ones who can't fight back. Or so he thinks." For the next hour, both women shared their stories. Brenner's tactics were consistent. isolated stops, inappropriate touching, escalation if they resisted. Always followed by charges, always buried by internal affairs. Miriam documented everything, occasionally asking clarifying questions in her gentle but precise way. "I have draft testimonies prepared," Miriam said finally, pulling papers from her briefcase. "Read them carefully. Only sign if every word is accurate." While the women read, Sloane moved to the window. The shelter's security was decent, but not perfect. Too many blind spots. Too many ways for someone determined to get eyes inside. "A class action filing would be stronger than individual complaints," Miriam explained. "But going to the press first could compromise our legal position." "The press is already compromised," Sloane noted, thinking of the coordinated social media campaign against her. "They'll spin it their way no matter when we move." Ava looked up from her papers, something stronger now in her voice. "I'll sign. I'm tired of hiding." "Me too," Lena added. "Make him face us all at once." The scratching of pens filled the room. Miriam carefully witnessed each signature, making copies with a portable scanner. When she finished, she handed each woman a business card with a secure contact number. "Document everything from now on," she instructed. "Any unusual cars? Any random stops? Any contact from CPS? If you feel unsafe, call immediately." They left one at a time, using different exits. Sloane took the back stairs, emerging into the shelter's small parking area. She scanned the street methodically, left to right, checking reflected surfaces for hidden observers. That's when she saw it. The black SUV, parked directly across from the shelter's gate. Same model as before, different plates again. The windows were tinted, but she could make out a silhouette in the driver's seat. Someone was watching, waiting, sending a message. Sloane transformed her home office into a command center with military precision. 3 laptops formed a semicircle on her desk, each dedicated to different aspects of the investigation. The largest monitor displayed a detailed timeline of Brenner's complaints. The second tracked Civic Sentinel's contracts. The third ran continuous searches through public records. She'd covered one wall with a massive whiteboard, mapping connections between the Arlington PD, internal affairs, and city officials with red marker lines that grew more tangled by the hour. Personnel files and testimonies were sorted into neat stacks on a folding table, each tab color-coded by category. The doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. Through the security camera, Sloane observed Nia Serrano on her porch. Tall, confident stance, press credentials visible. Military bearing was hard to hide. Sloane recognized it instantly. "Nice setup," Nia commented after clearing the security protocols. She carried a heavy messenger bag and a determined expression. "Reminds me of my intel days." "Petty officer?" Sloane asked, noting Nia's unconscious hand placement. Typical Navy training. "First class. Naval intelligence before journalism." Nia unpacked her laptop. "Still have some useful contacts." They worked methodically, Nia's investigative skills complementing Sloane's tactical approach. Hours passed as they built their case, connecting dots others had missed, or deliberately obscured. "Look at this pattern," Nia said, pulling up a spreadsheet. Civic Sentinel's contracts expanded right after natural disasters. Hurricane relief, flood response. "When oversight is weakest," Sloane finished. She pointed to a cluster of dates. "Cross-reference these with the Governor's Emergency Displacement Fund." Nia's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Got it. The fund was established after Hurricane Maria, but most of the money went to community security initiatives in gentrifying neighborhoods. Through Civic Sentinel? Through shell companies first. Then Civic Sentinel." Nia leaned back, eyes narrowing. "They're using disaster relief money to fund private surveillance, targeting specific demographics during emergency relocations." Sloane added another red line to the board. and Councilman Vaughn sits on the fund's oversight committee, while owning the company getting the contracts. Nia pulled up property records. Check this out. Every neighborhood where Brenner had complaints, Civic Sentinel installed new security systems within 6 months, creating their own emergencies to justify the response. Sloane's voice was cold. How many other officers are working with them? They dug deeper. Nia accessed sealed court records through her press credentials. Sloane cross-referenced them with internal affairs dismissals. A pattern emerged. Complaints buried, victims displaced, properties devalued, then purchased by development companies connected to Vaughn. They're not just harassing people, Nia realized. They're systematically driving them out. The wall map grew more complex. Red lines connected police precincts to security contracts, housing authorities to shell companies, displacement funds to private developers. At the center, Brenner, Vaughn, and a web of corrupted officials. Your assault wasn't random, Nia said quietly. You moved into one of their target zones, but they didn't expect someone who could fight back. Sloane studied the evidence wall. Someone with resources, or someone willing to expose the whole system. Nia started organizing files into secure folders. This goes way beyond police misconduct. It's institutional corruption using public funds. They worked past midnight, documenting everything. Nia set up encrypted backups, while Sloane prepared evidence packages, one for Miriam, one for federal authorities, one for trusted media contacts. We need to move fast, Nia advised. Once they realize what we've uncovered, they'll try to bury it, Sloane agreed. Or us. At 2 a.m., as Nia was preparing to leave, Sloane's secure line rang. The number showed as blocked. She activated the recording system and answered on speaker. A digitally altered voice crackled through. Back off. You've got no idea what you're in. The line went dead with a sharp click. The headline blazed across the Arlington Tribune's website at exactly 6 a.m., commanded into silence. One woman's stand against a corrupt system. Nia Serrano's byline sat beneath it, followed by a devastating opening paragraph that sent shockwaves through the community. Sloane watched the story go live from her kitchen, coffee untouched beside her laptop. The article was masterfully structured, starting with her assault, then methodically exposing the deeper corruption. The embedded video from her smartwatch played automatically, showing Officer Brenner's smug face in crisp detail as he violated her rights. Her phone buzzed constantly. Text messages, calls, email notifications. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the public reaction unfolding in real time. The story's view counter ticked up exponentially. By 8 a.m., 3 news vans had parked along her street. Reporters stood in her front yard, doing live stand-ups against the backdrop of her home. Sloane watched through security cameras as more arrived, setting up equipment and jockeying for positions. They're running it nationally, Nia reported over the phone. CNN just picked it up. Fox, too. The governor's office keeps sending no-comment responses, which is only making it worse for them. Any movement from internal affairs? Sloane asked, scanning police frequencies on a secondary monitor. Complete lockdown. But 3 officers just requested whistleblower protection through my editor. They want to talk. Sloane's secure email pinged. Interview requests from major networks. 60 Minutes? Dateline. Good Morning America. They wanted the decorated Delta Force commander who exposed systemic corruption. The warrior turned whistleblower. The victim who fought back. Morning Joe wants you live tomorrow, Nia said. So does The View. This is blowing up faster than we expected. Through her front windows, Sloane watched more media arriving. Local activists had begun gathering too, holding signs demanding justice. Someone had distributed copies of Nia's article, and people were reading them in small groups on her lawn. Councilman Vaughn just announced an emergency press conference, Nia reported. His hands are shaking in the preview footage. He knows we have the contract trails. The article had laid it all bare. Falsified emergency funds, targeted harassment campaigns, forced displacement of minorities, surveillance networks disguised as community safety measures. Each accusation backed by documents, witnesses, and data that Nia had verified through multiple sources. Sloane's military phone lit up. Ray Jackson's name flashed on the screen. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," he said without preamble. "Pentagon's getting calls. They want to know if you violated any confidentiality agreements accessing those databases." "Everything was legal," Sloane replied, "and necessary. They're scrambling. Governor's office is pressuring DOD to discredit you, claiming you used military credentials to interfere with local law enforcement. The truth isn't interference, Ray." A commotion outside drew her attention. Officer Brenner's victims had arrived, speaking to reporters. Ava Marcus stood tall before the cameras, describing how her children were taken after she reported his assault. Others joined her, finally able to tell their stories. Sloane's home security system pinged. The black SUV that had been following her was parked 2 blocks away, occupants watching through tinted windows. "Social media's exploding," Nia updated. "Your hashtag is trending. People are coming forward from other precincts, other cities. Similar patterns everywhere." The article's comment section filled with thousands of responses. Former residents sharing their own experiences. Current officers expressing disgust. Citizens demanding accountability. The story had struck a nerve that went far beyond Arlington. At 11 a.m., breaking news alerts flashed. The FBI announced a preliminary investigation into Civic Sentinel's contracts. The police chief called an emergency meeting. Internal affairs went dark. Their office phones disconnected. "They're panicking," Nia observed. "Shredders running full-time at City Hall, according to my source inside." Sloane watched the chaos unfold with careful detachment. This was the exposure phase. Let them scramble. Let them make mistakes. Every reaction revealed new threads to pull. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. Through the security camera, Sloane observed 2 men in suits, holding official documents. Federal marshals, based on their stance and credentials. "Ms. Harris?" The taller one held out a thick envelope. "You've been served. This is a federal subpoena demanding immediate surrender of all electronic devices and encrypted data related to your investigation. The order cites national security concerns." Sloane accepted the envelope without expression, noting the classified markings. They were trying to bury the evidence under layers of security clearance. Standard tactic when corruption reached certain levels. "Your devices must be surrendered within 24 hours, the marshal continued. "Any attempt to delete, copy, or transfer data will result in immediate arrest." Through her front window, Sloane could see the media filming the encounter. The story was about to enter a new phase. They thought they could silence her with bureaucracy and classification. They still didn't understand who they were dealing with. The setting sun cast long shadows across Sloane's driveway as she pulled in, exhausted from hours of media chaos. Something felt wrong immediately. Her tactical instincts, honed through years of Delta Force operations, sparked to life. The front door stood slightly open, maybe 2 inches. Not enough for a casual observer to notice, but to Sloane it might as well have been a flashing warning sign. She drew her sidearm smoothly, years of training taking over. "Rook?" she called out softly. Her German shepherd always greeted her at the door with excited barks. The silence was deafening. Sloane moved through the entrance with practiced precision, checking corners, staying low. The house felt wrong, empty. Then she saw him. Rook lay motionless by the stone fireplace, his black and tan coat still glossy in the fading light. No blood, no signs of trauma. Just stillness, where there should have been life. No, 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 Sloane whispered, holstering her weapon and rushing to his side. His body was still warm, but no heartbeat pulsed beneath her trembling fingers. She spotted a half-eaten piece of meat nearby, not from her kitchen. Poisoned. A message. Sloane's hands clenched into fists as she fought to maintain control. Rook had been with her since she left active duty, a loyal companion who helped ease her transition to civilian life. He'd been more than a pet. He was her anchor, her silent confidant during sleepless nights when the memories of combat felt too close. She forced herself to step back and assess the scene professionally. The house had been entered with expertise. No broken windows, no splintered frames. The security system showed a 3-minute power outage at 3:47 p.m., just long enough to slip in and out. Her cameras had gone dark during the same window. Her phone buzzed. Miriam James. "They're trying to classify everything," the attorney said without preamble. "I'm filing an emergency injunction to block the subpoena. This is a clear attempt to bury evidence of criminal conduct under national security provisions." Sloane stared at Rook's still form. "They killed my dog, Miriam." A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Are you safe? I can have a security team there in 20 minutes. I need you focused on protecting our witnesses. They're escalating." Sloane's voice was steady, despite the rage building in her chest. This was a professional hit. "Clean entry, timed blackout, targeted strike. Let me call in some favors with the FBI. We need protection." "No," Sloane cut her off. "They've got hooks in federal agencies. That's why they're pushing the national security angle. Keep everything local for now." She ended the call and dialed Ray Jackson. He answered immediately. "I heard," he said grimly. "I'm trying to get you federal protection, but they've locked me out of the approval chain. Someone up high is running interference." "Shadow ops," Sloane said flatly. "Private contractors with government connections. This has Civic Sentinel's fingerprints all over it." "You're in shadow territory now," Ray warned. "These people operate between jurisdictions. They've got badges when they need them, and deniability when they don't. The regular playbook won't work." Sloane walked to her kitchen, every nerve alert. The intruders had left things slightly out of place. A cabinet door not quite closed, a chair angled wrong. Another message. "We can reach you anywhere." "They're trying to spook me before the story spreads further," she said. "Classic psychological warfare. Hit close to home, demonstrate access, create fear of the unknown." "It's working," Ray replied. 3 witnesses have already gone dark. Nia's editor is getting pressure from their board of directors. They're trying to isolate you." Sloane checked her supplies. Weapons, ammunition, go bags. Everything was untouched. They could have taken or tampered with anything. Instead, they chose to kill her dog. Personal. Emotional. "I need you to do something for me," she told Ray. "Pull satellite coverage for my street between 3:30 and 4 p.m. They had to stage somewhere nearby for the power cut. That's highly classified. So is half the corruption we've uncovered. Fight fire with fire." She spent the next hour documenting everything, taking photos, collecting samples. The piece of poisoned meat went into an evidence bag. She'd have it analyzed privately. No trusting official labs now. As midnight approached, Sloane carried Rook's body to her backyard. The moon cast enough light to dig by. Each shovelful of earth felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She worked steadily until dawn, painted the sky in shades of gray. Birds began their morning songs as she placed Rook gently in the grave, wrapping him in his favorite blanket first. Standing over the fresh earth, Sloane whispered, "I'm not backing down. Not now." The words carried the weight of a vow in the early morning stillness. She had crossed a line into their shadow world. They thought killing her dog would make her retreat. They had badly miscalculated. Miriam James sat in her darkened office, reviewing witness statements for the 100th time. Her desk lamp cast a warm circle on decades of legal texts and civil rights victories lining the walls. At 72, she'd seen enough corruption to last several lifetimes, but this case felt different, personal. Her computer chimed with a new message. Anonymous sender. I worked at Arlington PD Records. I have proof. Everything. Meet me at Rosie's Diner. 11 p.m. Come alone. Tori W. Miriam leaned back, mind racing. A precinct insider could change everything. But it could also be a trap. She dialed Sloan. Got a potential whistleblower, Miriam said. Former records clerk wanting to meet. Tori Willis, Sloan replied immediately. 27, resigned 2 months ago. Clean record, no red flags. I vetted all recent departures. Miriam smiled. Of course, Sloan had already mapped out every possible ally. You think it's legitimate? Only one way to find out. But I'll have eyes on you. Rosie's Diner sat on the edge of town, a faded neon paradise of vinyl booths and endless coffee. At 11 p.m., only a few truckers hunched over late-night specials. Miriam chose a booth with clear sightlines to both exits. A young white woman in a plain gray hoodie slipped in exactly on time, eyes darting nervously. She looked exactly like her ID photo. Shoulder-length brown hair, minimal makeup, the kind of face that blended into any crowd. Ms. Willis? Miriam kept her voice low. I'm Miriam James. Tori slid into the booth, hands trembling slightly. Thank you for coming. I've been following the story. About Commander Harris. A tired-looking waitress approached. Miriam ordered coffee for both of them, buying time to study the younger woman. Tori's nervousness seemed genuine. The slight shake in her hands, the way she couldn't quite meet Miriam's eyes. Why now? Miriam asked once they were alone. You left the department months ago. Tori stared into her coffee. I couldn't sleep. After seeing what they did to her dog, she swallowed hard. I kept telling myself someone else would handle it, that it wasn't my problem anymore. But they're escalating, aren't they? And I have proof. Real proof. She reached into her hoodie pocket and withdrew a small flash drive, placing it carefully on the table between them. Everything's here. Emails about targeting specific neighborhoods, shift logs showing which officers covered for each other, internal affairs reports that got buried. Miriam didn't reach for it yet. And Officer Brenner? His body cam footage from that morning. The real version, not the edited one they kept. And after. In the squad room. Tori's voice hardened slightly. They were laughing about it. Brenner was bragging, showing them exactly how he... She couldn't finish. Why did you keep these files? Miriam asked gently. Tori's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm a coward. I saw things for years. Reports vanishing, complaints getting buried, footage getting altered. But I never said anything. I just filed things, processed paperwork, pretended I didn't notice. She wiped her eyes roughly with her sleeve. But I couldn't delete everything. So I started keeping copies. Just in case someone brave enough came along. Someone they couldn't intimidate or buy off. The waitress returned with fresh coffee. They sat in silence until she left. They'll know it was you, Miriam said finally. I know. Tori's voice was barely a whisper. But maybe this makes up for staying quiet so long. A little bit, anyway. Miriam reached across the table and squeezed the young woman's hand. Courage isn't about being fearless, dear. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. She carefully picked up the flash drive. We'll protect you. Commander Harris has resources. We can get you somewhere safe until this is over. Tori shook her head. I've got family in Minnesota. Already booked my ticket. Leaving tonight. She stood up, pulling her hoodie tighter. Just make it count, okay? Make them answer for everything. We will, Miriam promised. Tori paused, looking back. You know what finally made me do it? When I saw Commander Harris that morning, I thought she looked so dignified, even while Brenner was being horrible, like she knew exactly who she was. And I realized I needed to know who I was, too. She touched the flash drive one last time. I kept it, because I knew someday someone would finally fight back. The Rayburn House office building hummed with anticipation. Camera crews jostled for position in the packed hearing room as the House Subcommittee on Law Enforcement Oversight prepared to begin. Sloane Harris sat perfectly still at the witness table, her military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. Beside her, Miriam James arranged her notes with practiced precision. Congresswoman Eleanor Chen gavelled the session to order. Today we examine disturbing allegations of systemic abuse within the Arlington Police Department. Our first witness is Commander Sloane Harris. Sloane leaned forward to the microphone. Her voice was steady, controlled. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm here today because what happened to me isn't unique. It's just that this time they picked the wrong target. The room fell silent as she described that morning's jog, the patrol car, the stop, the violation. Her words were precise, clinical almost, but the emotion beneath them was palpable. Officer Brenner didn't know my background, she continued. He didn't know I had training to recognize predatory behavior. He didn't know I understood exactly how systems protect men like him. He just saw what he wanted to see. Another black woman he could humiliate without consequences. Representative Marcus Wade leaned forward. Commander Harris, you chose not to report this immediately. Why? Because I needed to understand the full scope, Sloane replied. One corrupt officer is a problem, but a system designed to protect him? That's a crisis. Miriam James took over, outlining the retaliatory campaign, the surveillance, the poisoned dog, the smear attempts. She projected documentation onto the chamber's screens, internal emails, altered reports, buried complaints. This goes beyond one department, Miriam declared. We've uncovered a network of private security contracts, misappropriated disaster funds, and coordinated harassment of victims who dare to speak up. The committee called their next witness. Nia Serrano strode to the table, press credentials hanging from her neck. She detailed her investigation's findings, laying out the connections between Civic Sentinel, Councilman Vaughn, and the police department's Internal Affairs Division. They built a parallel surveillance system, Nia explained, using public money meant for hurricane relief. They targeted specific neighborhoods, specific demographics. And when anyone complained, they had the power to make those complaints disappear. The room stirred as she played audio recordings, officers laughing about harassment, discussing cover-ups, planning retaliation against witnesses. Several committee members visibly recoiled. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The full, unedited body cam footage from Officer Brenner began playing on the screens. The assault itself lasted only seconds. But the squad room footage that followed showed officers watching it later, laughing, making crude comments. Brenner demonstrating his actions proudly. One voice clearly saying, "That'll teach her to jog in our neighborhood." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Several phones began buzzing with news alerts as the footage went viral in real time. The survivors testified next. 3 women described similar assaults, similar cover-ups. Their voices shook but held firm as they recounted lost jobs, lost homes, lost custody of children, all for daring to report abuse. Congresswoman Chen's voice was tight with controlled anger. Commander Harris, what do you recommend as immediate actions? A full federal investigation, Sloane answered without hesitation. Not just of Arlington PD, but every department using these private security contracts. Audit the disaster relief funds. Review every complaint dismissed by compromised internal affairs divisions. And most importantly, protect the victims who come forward. Because right now, the system punishes them for speaking up. Representative Wade nodded grimly. I believe we've heard enough. This committee will be calling for immediate Justice Department intervention. As the hearing concluded, phones throughout the room lit up simultaneously. News alerts flashed. Breaking. Officer Kyle Brenner arrested by federal agents. Developing. Arlington councilman. Vaughn announces immediate resignation. Urgent. Virginia AG opens criminal probe into police corruption. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Cameras swung toward Sloan, but her expression remained composed. She gathered her papers slowly, deliberately, just as she had been trained to do in countless high-pressure situations. A young aide rushed up to Miriam, whispering urgently. The attorney's eyes widened slightly as she turned to Sloan. Internal Affairs Director Milner just resigned. The whole division is being suspended pending investigation. Sloan nodded once, her face revealing nothing. But inside, a weight she'd carried since that morning jog finally began to lift. Not just for her. For every woman who'd been silenced. For every victim who'd lost hope. As they walked toward the chamber doors, reporters shouted questions. Camera lights flashed. But Sloan's mind was already on the next phase. Ensuring this momentum led to real change. Not just headlines. They stepped into the marble hallway where Nia waited, already typing rapidly on her phone. It's everywhere, the journalist said. Every major network. Social media's exploding. They can't bury this anymore. Blue and red lights flashed across Civic Sentinel's glass-fronted offices as FBI agents streamed through the building's revolving doors. Employees stood in clusters on the sidewalk, watching as boxes of documents and hard drives were carried out. Some looked shocked. Others seemed relieved, as if they'd been waiting for this day. Special Agent Marcus Torres directed the operation from the street, speaking quietly into his radio. Sweep the server room again. Check for any deletion attempts. He caught sight of Sloan watching from across the street and gave her a slight nod. Inside Arlington Police Headquarters, similar scenes played out. Internal Affairs officers were escorted from their offices, their computers seized, their badges and weapons temporarily confiscated. Jack Milner, Brenner's cousin and former IA director, sat stone-faced as agents boxed up his files. 20 years of cover-ups, one agent muttered, lifting a heavy box labeled Dismissed Complaints, 2018-2023. All going to see daylight now. At the courthouse, Kyle Brenner stood before Judge Patricia Martinez in an orange jumpsuit, his usual swagger replaced by nervous fidgeting. His lawyer argued for bail, citing community ties and minimal flight risk. Judge Martinez wasn't having it. Given the severity of the charges and evidence of systematic witness intimidation, bail is denied. The defendant will be remanded to federal custody pending trial. Brenner's face went pale as U.S. Marshals led him away. In the gallery, several of his former victims watched silently, their expressions a mix of relief and lingering pain. Across town, Councilman Derek Vaughn's attempted escape ended at Dulles International Airport. He'd made it as far as the private aviation terminal when federal agents surrounded his chartered plane. As they led him away in handcuffs, his carefully maintained political mask finally cracked. "You don't understand," he shouted at the cameras. "We were maintaining order. We were protecting property values." Back at the precinct, newly appointed Interim Chief Sandra Martinez addressed the assembled officers. Effective immediately, all employees who come forward with information about misconduct will receive full whistleblower protection. This department's culture of silence ends today. In the following days, the changes rippled outward. The mayor established a civilian oversight board with real enforcement power. State legislators drafted bills to regulate private security contractors. Police union leadership was replaced, after evidence emerged of their role in suppressing complaints. Sloan found herself increasingly in demand as a speaker. Police academies wanted her input on training reforms. Civil rights organizations sought her expertise on building accountability systems. News programs requested interviews about her experience. The problem wasn't just individual bad actors, she explained to a packed auditorium at Georgetown Law School. It was a system designed to protect them while punishing anyone who spoke up. That's what had to change. In Arlington's neighborhoods, particularly those targeted by Civic Sentinel's surveillance, a cautious optimism began to emerge. Community meetings that once sparked tension now featured productive dialogues between residents and police representatives. Ava Marcus, one of Brenner's earlier victims, moved back into her old neighborhood. With her case reopened and her record cleared, she regained custody of her children. Other survivors began coming forward, knowing they'd finally be heard. The precinct clerk who provided crucial evidence, Tori Willis, returned to work under new management. Her colleagues, many of whom had shunned her after the hearing, now sought her advice on reporting misconduct. She started a support group for department employees wrestling with similar ethical decisions. At the federal courthouse, Brenner's former partners began accepting plea deals, trading information for reduced sentences. Each new revelation sparked another investigation, another reform, another step toward accountability. Nia Serrano's follow-up articles detailed the full scope of corruption. Millions in misappropriated funds, hundreds of buried complaints, dozens of lives derailed by retaliatory actions. Her reporting earned multiple awards and sparked similar investigations in other cities. One morning, Sloan visited Miriam's office, finding the attorney surrounded by framed newspaper headlines. Justice served. Police corruption ring exposed. Reform sweeps Arlington PD. Victims vindicated as officials face charges. Miriam stood before the wall of articles, her expression thoughtful. She traced her fingers across one headline describing the new whistleblower protections. "You know what this proves?" she asked as Sloan joined her. "Justice is still possible." They studied the clippings together, each one representing another crack in a system that had seemed impenetrable just months ago. The photos showed Brenner in custody, Vaughn in handcuffs, federal agents carrying boxes of evidence. But more importantly, they showed survivors speaking out, communities healing, officers choosing integrity over silence. "The work isn't finished," Miriam added, adjusting one of the frames, "but for the first time in a long while, I believe we're moving in the right direction." 3 months passed, like a whirlwind. Sloan stood in the Department of Justice's main conference room, surrounded by polished wood panels and the weight of history. Attorney General Rebecca Chen handed her the official appointment letter. "Director Harris," Chen said, "Vanguard oversight is now your command. Make it count." Sloan ran her fingers over the embossed DOJ seal. The initiative represented everything they'd fought for: systematic accountability, veteran-led oversight, and a direct pipeline for survivors to seek justice. Her office would have federal authority to audit any police department in America. The next morning, she walked into Vanguard's newly established headquarters in Crystal City. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a clear view of the Pentagon across the river, a deliberate choice. The space hummed with energy as her hand-picked team settled in. "Welcome to Day 1, Sloan addressed the assembled group. "Each of you is here because you understand both sides of this equation, the need for effective law enforcement and the devastating impact of unchecked power." Her core team represented a careful balance. Former Marine Corps JAG officers staffed the legal division. Army intelligence veterans handled data analysis. Air Force security specialists managed protective details for witnesses and whistleblowers. Nia Serrano's desk sat prominently in the investigations wing. She'd resigned from her newspaper to become Vanguard's chief research advisor. bringing her ruthless attention to detail and network of sources. Currently, she was building a database of nationwide misconduct patterns. These aren't isolated incidents, Nia explained, pointing to a wall of connected cases. When we pull one thread, we usually find similar abuse patterns across multiple jurisdictions. Miriam James took charge of Vanguard's Legal Strategy Division, operating from a corner office filled with case files and civil rights law texts. Her decades of experience provided crucial guidance for younger attorneys learning to navigate the complex intersection of law enforcement and accountability. The system isn't broken, Miriam often reminded them. It was built this way. Our job is to rebuild it properly. Their first major action targeted Arlington, a full audit of every complaint filed in the past decade. The team reviewed body camera footage, personnel files, internal communications, and financial records. They interviewed hundreds of officers, victims, and witnesses. The findings were worse than expected. Dozens of officers had participated in cover-ups. Hundreds of legitimate complaints had been buried. Millions in taxpayer money had been funneled through shell companies like Civic Sentinel. But change came swiftly. The new police chief embraced Vanguard's recommendations, implementing mandatory reporting protocols and external review boards. Officers who had stayed silent before now had clear channels to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. One morning, Sloan received a visitor she'd been hoping to see. Ava Marcus walked into Vanguard's office, holding the hands of her two children. After months of legal battles and court-ordered reviews, she had finally regained full custody. The judge threw out every charge, Ava said, tears in her eyes. Said the evidence of police misconduct invalidated the whole case. Her daughter hugged her leg, while her son explored the office with curious eyes. Sloan watched them with quiet satisfaction. This was why Vanguard existed, not just to punish corrupt officers, but to restore what they had stolen from people like Ava. The initiative's impact spread rapidly. Police departments across the country began proactively requesting Vanguard audits, hoping to address problems before they escalated. Veteran groups offered their expertise. Survivors formed support networks. In the DOJ's marble-columned Great Hall, Sloan prepared for her first major public address. 2,000 people filled the audience. Police chiefs, civil rights leaders, elected officials, and most importantly, survivors of abuse. She spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Miriam sat in the front row, her usual stern expression softened with pride. Nia had her reporter's notebook ready, though she now wrote from the inside. Ava and her children watched from specially reserved seats. The room fell silent as Sloan approached the podium. Her Delta Force training showed in her posture, her measured movements, her calm authority. But her words carried the weight of every person who had ever faced abuse and found no recourse. 3 months ago, we launched Vanguard Oversight with a simple mission, she began, to ensure that those who enforce the law cannot place themselves above it. Today, I can report that we've already audited 12 departments, reviewed over 10,000 complaints, and helped restore justice to hundreds of victims. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. But numbers don't tell the whole story. Behind every statistic is a person who was wronged, a family that was torn apart, a community that lost faith in the system meant to protect them. The crowd listened intently as she detailed Vanguard's work, the methodical investigations, the pattern analysis, the commitment to both accountability and reform. She explained how military veterans brought unique skills to oversight roles, understanding both discipline and the danger of unchecked authority. "We will not be intimidated," she declared, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "We will not be erased." 6 months had passed since Vanguard's launch. Dawn painted Arlington's sky in soft pinks and golds as Sloan knelt beside Rook's granite headstone. her morning coffee steaming in the cool air. She'd planted wildflowers around the marker, blues and purples that reminded her of the mountain trails they used to hike together. "Morning, old friend," she whispered, touching the smooth stone. The German shepherd's death still ached, a reminder of how vicious the fight had become. But looking at the thriving garden around her, Sloane felt a different kind of strength now. Not the coiled tension of combat readiness, but something deeper and more permanent. She took a slow sip of coffee, letting the morning stillness wash over her. The past half-year had transformed more than just police departments. Communities were healing. Officers who'd stayed silent for years now had safe channels to report misconduct. Victims found their voices again. Her phone buzzed. Ray's message brought a smile to her face. "Just watched your interview. You did it." The 60 Minutes segment had aired last night, a full profile on Vanguard's work and impact. She'd been hesitant to do it at first, preferring to work quietly. But Nia had convinced her that transparency mattered. People needed to see that change was possible. The interview had covered everything, from that morning jog and Brenner's assault to the creation of Vanguard. They'd shown body camera footage from recent investigations, testimony from reformed departments, and stories of families reunited after years of systematic separation. Sloane traced Rook's name on the headstone. "Wish you could see it, boy," she murmured. "We're making it right." The garden had become her sanctuary during the hardest days of building Vanguard. Here, she could process the weight of survivors' stories, plan next steps, or simply breathe. The raised beds burst with vegetables now, tomatoes, peppers, herbs that filled the air with their sharp, clean scents. Her watch showed 6:45 a.m. Soon she'd head to the office, where another stack of case files waited. They'd expanded operations to 30 states, with requests coming in daily. Police unions that had initially resisted now sought their guidance on internal reforms. A patrol car appeared at the end of her street, moving slowly past the neat row of houses. Sloane's hand didn't tense toward her hip anymore. A small but significant change. The officer inside, a woman she recognized from recent departmental training sessions, nodded respectfully as she passed. It wasn't just courtesy. The entire culture had shifted. Arlington's new police chief had embraced Vanguard's oversight, implementing their recommendations with genuine commitment. Young officers especially appreciated having clear guidelines and protection when reporting misconduct. Sloane remembered Brenner's face in court when the verdict came down. 15 years for multiple counts of assault, corruption, and civil rights violations. He'd lost the swagger, the smirk, the certainty that the system would protect him. His cousin in internal affairs faced similar charges. But revenge had never been the goal. What mattered were the changes rippling outward. Ava Marcus now led a support network for families affected by police misconduct. Tori Willis, the brave clerk who'd preserved crucial evidence, helped design whistleblower protection protocols. The morning air carried distant sounds of the city waking up, traffic building on main roads, birds calling from nearby trees, a neighbor's door closing. Sloane finished her coffee, feeling the caffeine mix with purpose in her veins. Her phone buzzed again. "Miriam, this time. Need your eyes on the Seattle audit. Something bigger than we thought." That was happening more often now. One investigation revealing threads of a larger pattern. They'd learned to follow those threads carefully, building airtight cases before moving, patience and precision, just like her Delta Force days. The garden's peace had served its purpose, centering her for the day ahead. Sloane stood, her posture military straight despite the casual clothes. The quiet storm that had driven her through combat zones and federal hearings still burned behind her eyes, tempered now by experience and victory. Walking to her back door, she noted the security system's steady green light. The camera's silent watch. Old habits merged with new purpose. She'd learned to balance vigilance with openness, strength with accessibility. Inside, she locked the door with practiced efficiency. Her home office held the start of their next major investigation. Files spread across dual monitors, timelines mapped on whiteboards, witness statements waiting for review. Another city, another department, another chance to ensure accountability. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.